First off, my name is Ish. I want to thank everybody for being here today. It's a pleasure to have you here. It's Friday afternoon. You can literally be anywhere in the world. Secondly, I have a special guest here. Can we put our hands together for our guest, please, before I go on, please? So the funny thing is, I was going through the session notes, right? And I was trying to be as, concise as I could be when I was reading the briefs for this. So give me like 10 seconds. I want to read what the brief said we're going to discuss today. So it goes, this session with Chukwuka, handsome guy, by the way, will highlight how Africa's growth will be propelled by empowering its people to build sustainable enterprises and embrace systems thinking with a specific focus on youth. That is such a mouthful. So what we're going to do is we're going to summarize it. So my summary would be, how are we going to make systems thinking propel growth for Africa with youth at its core? Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
So let's get into it. Who is Chukwuka Monye?
Chukwuka Monye. Well, first of all, it's good to see everybody. It's good to be back here. I was just telling him that I passed a very, very important spot, Nando's, on my way here. So anytime I would want to eat something, slightly different from what you have here, Nando's was the spot. So it was good to see that today. Well, good to see everybody. Let me get into it. Who is Chukwuka Monye? I would probably start off by describing myself based on what you guys are doing here. And I'll say a social innovator, an innovation strategist. At least that's what I came here and paid a lot of money for. So I'll start with that. But at my core, who am I? I'm someone who's passionate about people, about making lives better. I'm someone who likes to, take on challenges and transform, places that I get involved in. I grew up in Nigeria. I was born in Lagos, Nigeria. And primary school, Nigeria, secondary school, Lagos as well. I went briefly to a university in Ogun State. How many people here are not Nigerian? Okay. So I need to ensure that I give you a little bit of context then, right? But Ogun State is another important state in southwest Nigeria. I started my university there, very brief stint, before going abroad for my undergraduate studies. I went to a university called Warner University in Florida. And I worked just for a bit in the US and decided that, hey, this is not me. I need to go home. I worked in the banking space, started in the investment management, investment banking world, moved to the money market space as well, and then moved back home after, right after becoming a branch manager for a credit union. So that was the first time people said, this guy is losing it. Why would you leave a branch manager position in a financial institution and go back home to do your NYSC?
Ooh.
Again, do I have to define or describe what NYSC is?
Let's just call it a year of not so much fun.
Is that what you call it? Yeah. And yeah, so moved back and, thought I was going to do a lot of investment related stuff. The idea was, hey, go, reach out to all your wealthy friends in the States, get some money, and go back and deploy capital. That wasn't quite what I did, because by the time I did some assessment of the opportunities, I realized very quickly that the markets in Africa were not really robust, were not really deep enough, So the question was, you can't really do what you were doing in the US. You need to think about, what you really want to do. And I said, well, if they're not deep, then let's make them deep. So I went into consulting to help deepen this, add value to businesses, help them grow, turn them around, and begin to build capacity, because that was another area that we saw a lot of challenges. Because when you would advise clients, they'll tell you a lot about the human, challenges, the human resources, the quality of the human resources. As a matter of fact, I remember a client that told me once that let's just forget about the African strategy. Let's just go Indian. In his thinking, that could be the solution, that somehow Africans were not delivering when it came to, being professional and delivering on the job. So I did independent consulting for a bit until 15 years ago, I established CUC Consulting. I see that there's an alumni here. That's Chima. So, a testament to, and for me, it was really fulfilling, setting that up, getting involved in real transformation of a lot of public sector and private sector businesses. It's now in multiple locations. It's doing well. And I stepped down as the managing partner in January after it celebrated its 15 years. And I decided to do something bigger, which was to decide, to run for the office of the president of Nigeria. And made that announcement officially on the 15th of January. Again, of course, people said, now we are convinced that you are nuts. Yeah. And 6-8 weeks later from the announcement, I'm here.
That's a lot to unpack. I will definitely come to a lot of the things you've said. So last night I was trying to figure out how to define systems thinking from a layman's point of view, right? So I broke it down into two ways. So when we're defining systems, we're talking about, a collection of parts or components that interact with each other and also interact with things outside of them.
Correct.
Right? And then the thinking part of it is the interrelations and the interactions between those components, right? So when you talk about systems thinking for Africa, how does that tie in to the growth of Africa as we know it today?
Okay. So I love Africa. It's a special place.
The weather is good.
Weather is super. Yeah. Now, the beauty of systems thinking is just, first of all, appreciating that it's an interrelation of parts. Now, I think a lot of times what Africa forces you to do, or really anything, is to begin to define these parts. What parts are you referring to? What are the things, what are those components that make up the system? Now, interestingly, when you look at a lot of problems in, how many people here are from Africa? South Africa? East Africa? West Africa? North Africa? Where are you from?
Egypt.
Lovely. Okay. When you think about a lot of things about Africa, you begin to realize that when you're thinking in terms of systems, the components that matter in Africa may not necessarily be the same components that are relevant in other continents. And I'll explain what I mean. I'm currently doing my doctorate in business, and I'm studying the factors that affect the commercialization of ideas. Why do we have such a high ideation rate in the continent, but it's not converting to businesses? Now, I'm using this as an example to talk about systems thinking. Ladies and gentlemen, if you come into the UK and you're trying to understand why ideas are not converting, a lot of times you're going to hear things like capacity building, no funding, access to finance. Those are the kind of things you hear. Okay. In our beloved continent, you can hear those things, but when you dig in deeper, you start to hear things like, my village people. Yeah. No infrastructure. No light. The components are different, but they matter. Okay. Therefore, when I'm thinking systems in our context, you have to go back to what matters the most and try to really understand that. Because it's only then that you'll be able to even problem solve. Because at the end of the day, you're here learning all this stuff about systems thinking, enterprise building, all that stuff. But ultimately, what you're learning needs to be relevant in the real world, right? Therefore, the way we think about these things and the way we apply them should matter. And a lot of times I tell people that sometimes it's even as basic as, when you go into your community, what do they need? We think big a lot of times, but sometimes it's as simple as a borehole. And because the borehole is a catalytic, intervention. If you have water, many other things that will happen in the community. We need to think in that way. We need to think differently, because if you do this, it affects this, and this affects this, and ultimately somebody's benefiting and you're making a life better. Because that's what matters. You can do all the fancy stuff, but if you're not having impact, then why are we doing what we're doing?
Impact, doing the fancy stuff. You talked about scalability without saying scalability. How I incorporate something in the UK, for example, and I can't do that in Africa, right? If you look at the numbers in terms of Africa's population and in terms of the youth in Africa, the world's median age right now is 29. Africa's median age is 20. Nigeria, the most populous black nation, the median age is 18. How do you link scalability and impact for us to use these numbers as an advantage to create sustainable enterprises?
Okay. So scalability is possible. Again, what was the main point? You guys are intelligent students. What was the main point I made earlier? My first answer. What's the key takeaway? What matters? Yeah. Okay. What matters? Okay. Now, for me to scale, what we're saying is, or let me say, what you're interested in is, how do we take advantage of this huge population to scale?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what matters when you're talking about scalability in the African context? In order for me to solve that problem, I'll ask you, what is the problem? Why do you think we don't scale? I hope it's okay that we have this conversation.
Absolutely.
Because it's only when you appreciate those components that we can begin to connect the dots, right?
Yep.
So what do you think is the reason why scaling is difficult in Africa? Just one or two people.
Because it's such a diverse market. Like, I mean, it's 54 countries, so many different languages, different cultures, so that's one challenge to scale.
Okay, is there any other country in the world that has a lot of diversity and is doing well? Or any other continent? Okay, so do we still want to take that position? Anyone else?
Aisha, please.
Infrastructure. Okay. So are you aware that, what do you call billion-dollar companies?
Unicorn.
Unicorns. Are you aware that a couple of unicorns in Nigeria and I think in Kenya as well, and a few countries, right? And in countries that have infrastructural challenges, is there a reason why we have unicorns despite the infrastructure deficit? Okay, that's one way to look at it. Yeah. And we can also look at it and say, you know what, perhaps if the infrastructure was there, you would have many more unicorns, right? But here's the reason why I'm bringing up these examples. When we're thinking in terms of navigating challenges, and we begin to unpack what these challenges are, you start to appreciate some of the things we're talking about, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's culture, whether it's languages, and all of that. But here is one of the fundamental reasons why we struggle to scale. Many times, the youth in Africa, young people, tend to remove themselves from the process of solving these problems or navigating these challenges. If you do some research, you will find out that we had more industrialists, we had more people building businesses of scale in our father's generation, in our grandparents' generation. We don't have a lot of institutions that, and a lot of young people are actually not thinking in terms of building institutions. If you do some research, you'll find out that they're thinking more in terms of, maybe digital online businesses, something quick, something easy. Let's do something in entertainment. Let's do something in fintech, nothing big. So it's good to have the conversation about scalability. But sometimes we need to even go back and ask ourselves, are people interested in scale? Yeah, that's one. The second thing is, there is a role that the youth have to play. You can't transform without skill from an involvement perspective. So if the young people across the continent today decide that they want a different kind of Africa, I think it can be achieved. But I don't think they're mentally, psychologically there yet. A few countries, if you look at the elections of some of the recent elections, you'll find out that, the youth were very instrumental in, the presidents that they've elected, indicating that the youth have a voice. They can do something if they decide to. But a lot of times and I'll use some quick examples before we go into your next point. And this might be going through your minds too. You've spent a few pounds sterling to come here, just a few, and some of you took loans. and you have the intention to repay, right? Chima, did you say no? I'm just checking. Right? So you have intentions to repay, but guess what happens typically? I want to go back home. I want to go make impact. And then you go and apply for a job back home. And the first rude shock is what?
Salary.
The salaries. Yeah.
Not just the salary.
Not just the salary.
It's benchmarking naira.
Benchmarking. Yeah. You know, but these are real issues, right? So you're not asking yourself, okay, I can get this kind of job in the UK or the US, pay me what? Versus this guy is telling me this and saying, I just come and give back for the love of your country. And you're saying, is the love of my country going to repay my loan? Yeah. So there are real issues. But there has to be a time when everybody decides that, hey, we need to figure out a way in which we can take advantage of our numbers.
Okay.
And that's sacrifice. It's huge. Guys, it cost me so much. Even to be here, it's costing me a great deal. Even to make the decision. Because you have a lot of people that are telling you, oh, wow, that's so inspiring, dude. Just, we're there for you. And I'm saying, what does that mean? You're there for me. Do you know the real meaning of getting into this or throwing your hat in the ring? It means resources. It means all sorts of things. But the conversation typically ends at, oh, wow, this is so inspiring. I really wish the best for you. Okay. Something should happen after that, typically. Yeah.
And then you make calls and you don't get feedback.
You don't get feedback. Or people make commitments and pledges. And when it's time, you're like, you know what? Let's wait for another couple of weeks. Let's see how things go. We're waiting for momentum. But you're the one that will cause the momentum. And this is the point I'm making. And it's with a lot of things about us in the continent. We all want the momentum. We all want, the big companies. They want the scale. We want to do many things, but it's not our responsibility.
Thank you. I want to segue a little bit. You co-authored a book. It's a bestseller, Business
Success
Secrets.
Yeah.
You should check it out. It's a pretty good book. And it's about how entrepreneurial thinking works. Mm-hmm. So personally, I'm a big fan of innovation before regulation, right? I'm not even a fan of innovation or regulation happening at the same time. Mm-hmm. Innovation first, then regulation comes way afterwards. Mm-hmm. So I say that to ask you this question. What role do you think, if at all, the government plays when it comes to entrepreneurship for the youth of Africa?
Based on my experience, very little. I think that, and I'll reference a conversation I had with some business owners, and I asked them simply, what would you like government to do for you? So when I get into power, what would you? They said, we don't want anything from government. And I was a bit surprised. Why? Because normally when they get involved, they just spoil everything. They ruin everything. We don't want you involved. Just leave us alone. And that's the reality. So if you look at the fintech space in Nigeria, for instance, would you say that government has enabled, the regulators have enabled a lot of the young people? I wouldn't say that. Now, do we think that there's a huge opportunity for regulators to help and guide, to steer growth? Absolutely. It will be huge. But because you have a lot of regulators across the country that don't have people like you and I, they cannot think in those terms. They're thinking, but they're thinking based on what they know. They're not thinking based on these kinds of exposure and experiences that and knowledge that you're getting. So regulation can play a big role, but is it currently playing a huge role? Not necessarily. I remember someone that said something. He said one of the key sectors that's thriving in Nigeria is only thriving because government hasn't figured it out. And that's the entertainment industry. That's not a good thing, but it's the reality. I'm sure that was not the answer you're looking for.
Yeah, that caught me off guard. So when you're president, we should just keep entertainment away from you, as much as
No,
as much as
I would actually want to harness it and make it even bigger, right?
yeah, it's just kind of sad that someone said that. That shows how, like you said, your discussion with business leaders, how they would rather want government to stay away as much as possible. There's an acronym that is usually associated with you, and it's called SPEC.
Yeah.
So social innovator, people builder, excellence driven, and community oriented. And you, from what I've heard about you, prior to me being told to do this, I heard that you focus a lot on, sustainable social economic development in Africa. The question is, and this is me playing the devil's advocate, by the way, why should we focus on that in Africa when we could focus on literally the last two words, economic development? Catch up with the rest of the world, then we can start thinking about the social and the sustainable.
We are poor. The short answer is we are poor as a continent. Therefore, to not think about social impact and to not think about ensuring that it is sustainable means that you are really not solving any problem. The continent is where it is today because we've had a lot of quick fixes. If you come in to an environment and you keep fixing things on a short-term basis, you're going to come back the next week and see that the problem still persists. So the only way you're going to have significant, real impact is that you think sustainably. Because you want that when poverty reduces in this community, that you don't want to come back 10 years from now and find out that there was a relapse. So you cannot think about it only from, economic development perspective alone, or that your business just needs to be profitable and make its own cash. No. Because it's going to bite you somehow. That's what makes system thinking relevant anyway. Because you still need to think about all the different factors that interplay. The moment you isolate one and you think only in a myopic way and about just one element or component of the system, it's going to affect you in the long run.
Thank you for that answer. There are two things that I want us to do before we leave. I want to ask you a question, just one more question, and then we throw it to the lovely audience. Everybody has a straight face on. I think you got everybody thinking, like, everybody has such a straight face on.
They're like, how do we get out of this?
The last question I want to ask you is, we are both Nigerians, so I just have to do this, right? You're running for presidency of the largest black population in the world. A country that, whether goes with the red arrow or the green arrow, affects the rest of Africa. And you're not running on the platform of the two major parties. You're running on the platform of ADC, which is a lovely looking lapel, by the way.
Thank you.
What is it about systems thinking that you've put into place to map out Nigeria's problems? And what has been your biggest revelation so far?
Okay. So, on this journey and maybe, trying to make this decision, there were a number of things that I looked at. I started off last year, by the way, not even thinking I was going to do this. That wasn't my plan. The plan was to, continue working on my doctorate, step down from CUC and begin to relax. I've worked too hard for a long time. I moved back to Nigeria in 2002. So for 2 decades, I've been sweating. And so I thought, okay, you know what? Let me do what you do. Let me just relax and just, I'm young and I have gray hair because I'm working too hard, And halfway the year, after doing a small tour, looking at where we're expanding the business, I was in Nairobi, Mombasa, Kampala. I just wanted to explore. And we all seem to be saying the same thing, across the continent. I came back and I said, I started to feel a lot of unease, thinking about how do we crack this thing? And I realized that each time I had conversations with people, the way the conversations ended was not, there was no action, no call to action. Everybody just felt comfortable complaining about it. So I said, you know what, guys? I'm going to raise my hand, But beyond just raising hand to say I am acting on this, I had to process quite a number of things, including what you've just asked me. Okay, on what platform are you going to do this? A logical thing, that one would consider is one of the 2 main parties. Yeah? A lot of people will tell you they've got platform, they've got structure, they've got this, that, and the other. And I did consider it. I actually considered PDP. Now, the moment, and everyone advises you to make sure you consult with different people, stakeholders. And I started to consult with. That was before I made the decision or the announcement. And realized that I am not necessarily contributing to change if I go with one of these 2 parties. Why? I'll give you a simple example. Even with the consultation, who knows what it means to wage collar? Nigerian guys. When they say wage collar, what does it mean? You guys are very... Yeah. So to wage collar is to support, to support something, support an initiative. So when you're consulting, you don't consult without bringing gifts. You may bring a wine, you may bring something. Now, I'm going to show you the difference between consultation with some of my ADC people and consultation with my PDP people and other parties. Someone from one of the big parties said, how many cartons of Hennessy do you buy on a weekly basis for a consultation? Someone in ADC said, I hope you drink palm wine. Very different thinking. So you're starting off as a young person at a disadvantage in one of the 2 big parties because the expectation is, you guys saw the article on the cost of running an election. I think it was Times or New York Times or something.
Yeah.
They said between $1 and $3 billion. So the question is, if you spend $1 or $3 billion becoming president. How does the country recover from that? So applying systems thinking for me, just processing all of this, it was just too difficult for me to think about using these platforms as the pathway to solving the problem, because you cannot solve the problem using those platforms. Impossible. Now, is it going to be easy if you use another platform? Definitely not. But it becomes clearer that the worst thing that can happen when you use a more neutral platform, an emerging platform, is that you don't win, but you shifted mindsets, which in itself is success. Because ultimately, you want to ensure that you're coming out of this feeling convicted and satisfied and fulfilled. So the upside when you're thinking strategically is, hey, I'm in Aso Rock, and it will be lovely that it happens, and I look forward to seeing you guys there. But what's the downside? That you impacted the political landscape significantly. And I'm also very okay with that. But if I'd gone on the other platforms, very little impact. It's the same.
Thank you.
Systems thinking.
Systems thinking. I think you're walking the talk in the sense of one person trying to make his own change as much as possible. And I really appreciate that. Thank you, Chukwuka. We are out of time. Thank you all so much for coming. We have one more amazing session with Rose and Allison. Please stay back. And can we give a round of applause for Chukwuka one more time, please?